Good morning. My name is Mohit Joshi, President at Infosys, talking to you here today from London. And I have the pleasure and the privilege to have with me Gunjan Sinha, Chairman at MetricStream, for our fireside chat on being resilient. How do we enhance business resilience using integrated GRC? Thank you so much, Gunjan, for your time. And it'd be great to hear a little bit about your journey and your background.
Thank you, Mohit, and really appreciate setting this up. I look forward to the conversation today. So, yeah, I'm Gunjan Sinha. I'm the Executive Chairman and founder of MetricStream. I'm here in Palo Alto, California, and looking forward to our conversation today. Last 25 years, I've built a number of companies and businesses, and really proud to see how MetricStream has handle the whole topic of risk and governance and compliance, which is so very relevant in the current times that we are experiencing in the post-COVID-19 realities. Over to you, Mohit.
Thank you, Gunjan. And look, I think, as you mentioned, you've built a huge number of very successful internet businesses, Gunjan, and you shared previously that for you, 9/11 was the trigger that got you to thinking about creating the blueprint for what is now a very successful company in MetricStream. I just want to ask you, as you look through the founding of MetricStream, as you look at 9/11, as you look at the global financial crisis, and as you look at COVID-19, as you mentioned, what do you think are some of the similarities and differences between these crises, from a governance and from a resilience perspective?
That's a very, apt question, Mohit. And I've been, reflecting, given, what we are experiencing. But it is true that, I literally got the inspiration of this company in September 11, 2001. That night, it was nighttime in Tokyo, and I was in the tallest tower of Tokyo, one of the hotels in Tokyo. At 3 a.m., when the first plane hit New York, they actually ushered us down to the ground floor in Tokyo. And literally, I was 10,000 miles away. And for the next 5-7 days, there were no flights back to the United States. And there was a heightened sense of awareness in Tokyo that, there could be an attack like that in Tokyo. The fear had gripped the world. The fear had gripped the financial, markets, and it felt like a nuclear winter, if you recall back then. And I sat there and I said, when I got back to US, I started talking to people here, in Silicon Valley with some of the investors and venture capitalists and people here, just to understand what's the reality. And that's when the MetricStream concept kind of came to me. And as we built the company, by 2008, what was interesting was, because of the financial connectedness, and I call that the first wave of GRC, Mohit, that was the first wave of GRC that kind of came into play as Bear Stearns at Lehman Brothers as they collapsed. This is 2008. Literally, I can vividly remember, what it felt like back then in 2008. And because the world was financially connected, that financial connectedness is an amazing thing. It's a positive thing. But the risk side of the equation is what had played by then. And there was literally a contagion effect on the financial markets around the world. So that was the first wave. If you fast forward to 2015, which is, by that time, I felt like there was a lot of technological connectedness in place. If you think about it, social media, at scale, like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and all the stuff, mobile phones, billions of people on mobile phones. So technological connection had really played its role. So the cyber risks started to become the second wave of GRC. So in my mind, the first wave was the financial risk. The second was the cyber risk. And that's where the whole cyber GRC kind of took its root. But if you fast forward to today, in March of 2020, when we first experienced, at least in the US, the whole COVID-19 realities, to me, this is about the biological connectedness that as a society we have. And it is a rude awakening that, we are indeed connected biologically across the planet. And this pandemic is an outcome coming out of that. And to me, risk management now takes on the third wave. And I call this the third wave of GRC, which is not just the financial risks, not just the cyber risks. Now you have to start to think about biological risks. And ultimately, the shoe that has not dropped yet, and unfortunately, this event is in my mind is a dry run. It is what I would call the climate risk, which is which is yet to come, and we have to become preemptive and proactive. But I want us to think about these four things: the financial risk, the cyber risk, the biological risk, and the climate risk are the four waves of GRC. And as a society, as executives, as leaders, it is our responsibility to really to work through them and build a sustainable value proposition, and not be caught off guard. So that's just my kind of train of thought currently as I've reflected over the last 20 years.
No, thank you, Gunjan. I think to start with, I must say it is an incredible founding story, and you really tell it very well. The very vivid imagery that you used about your being in Tokyo and looking down and wondering if there was going to be a plane plowing into Tokyo, and how that led you to build MetricStream. It's a very powerful story, and I love the way that you connected the various elements of risk, right? The failure of operational intelligence, or the operational risk for 9/11, the financial risk, the information technology related risks, the biological risks, and now the risks potentially with climate. So it's a wonderful weaving together of the risks that we face as businesses, but most importantly as human beings. It gives a really composite picture to all of us of the risks that we face. So thank you for that. If I may just expand a little bit, ask you to expand a little bit more on the immediate and the medium to long-term impacts of COVID on businesses, and therefore, because businesses are the foundation for employment and for government revenues, it's really very critical. You and I were talking briefly about the fact that there seems to be a disconnect between how large businesses that are not dependent on in-person interaction with customers have really not faced a crisis at all. Businesses like ours and like yours have survived very well by being in the digital world, but at the same time, we are seeing a steep challenge to businesses like airlines, for instance, that do need that direct physical interaction, or to small and medium businesses that have not been digitally enabled to the same degree. How do you think about the shape of the recovery, and what advice would you have for firms as they look to to dig their way out of this current pandemic?
Yeah, Mohit, and then that is, as a company focusing on risk management, I mean, this is a top of the mind question, right? Like, and I one of the things which I did was I said, I mean, let's look at the flip side of the coin. I mean, there's so much, people worrying about things that can go wrong and that should go wrong and that could go wrong. I have been now thinking about the word resilience, and I'm saying,
Yes.
how do we put resilience on the spotlight, and how do we think about building a more resilient, businesses, whether it's a large firm or it's a small, main street, firm, regardless, we need to create an environment where companies and businesses and the society itself can be more resilient to these kinds of risks. So when I look at the recovery, I think we have to understand how we build more resilience into the very fabric of the business. And just like, CEOs and boards are worried about and thinking about, okay, how do we drive earnings and revenues and growth and, or EPS and all of the good measures, which are all quant measures.
Yes.
And I think the time is also appropriate for, shareholders and stakeholders, as well as the boards and CEOs, to really like ask the question, do you have all the qualitative measures in control? And, for example, how are you looking at sustainability? How are you looking at resilience? How are you looking at these types of attributes of the culture of the organization? When you
Yes.
start to create these frameworks and operationalize them through systems and technology and digital software, these things then give you the foundation that you can be operational even when you are in difficult times, even when you're hitting with crisis. So when I see the shape of recovery, that people who had greater degree of investments in these types of technologies and things are better situated to deal with things. So, for example, they would have less impact on their supply chains and they would be able to conduct their affairs. But unfortunately, the whole world wasn't exactly at that place. So, there's a real awakening here that we need to be better prepared for not just this pandemic, but anything that could hit us down the road. And I think, given the state of affair in the world, given that the financial connectedness and risks are still around, the cyber issues are still real, and
Yes.
now with the biological and the climate risk, this is not something that can be an afterthought. This has to be a forethought. You have to be preemptive, you have to be proactive, and you have to make the critical investments in personnel, in technologies, in resources to be able to make sure that you have a true foundation of a sustainable and enduring business. And to me, if that's the mindset of whether you're a small business or a large business, you will figure it out. You will figure out the answer. But this cannot be an afterthought that somehow I can just continue running my business as long as my profits and revenues and my growth is right, I'm good to go. I don't think that works anymore.
No, that's a very valid point. I think I like the fact that the need to be proactive, the need to build models, even if even if they're indicative only, I think is very important. And the point that you made about trying to capture to the degree possible you can the qualitative factors. For instance, trust in the team, I think is a very important component of the culture of a firm, but it's very critical to resilience, right? Firms that have a high trust within teams will be more resilient than firms, for instance, where the degree of trust is very low. And we saw this in the financial crisis as well, right? I mean,
Yeah.
firms like Bear and Lehman, which historically had weaker cultures, did not survive, while firms that had stronger, more well-knit and cohesive cultures were more successful. So that's a deep insight. So Gunjan, as we plow our way through this crisis, clearly we are seeing specific demands coming to us from our clients, right? So at Infosys, for instance, we're seeing a fairly significant amount of demand which is focused around migration to the cloud. We are seeing demand for increased collaboration tools for employees. We are seeing demands for building out new and enhanced user journeys for customers for the digital channels. We're also seeing a demand for, let's say, making sure that the organization is fit for purpose from a cost perspective in the future. Some work in building out new platforms. From your perspective at MetricStream, what are 3 or 4 things that you're seeing customers ask you for almost urgently at the time of this pandemic?
Yeah, no, and I think we are definitely seeing the effect of the pandemic, and as I said, this is an awakening for people to realize what is absolutely critical to invest in, because risk has hit us, and this is probably one of the biggest risk events over the last 100 years as a society
Yes.
that we're experiencing right now. So but I'll tell you, the areas where people are quite focused on are operational resilience. They're really thinking about systems to build operational resilience. They're looking at things like business continuity. You want to make sure that you have business continuity planning as a core framework. So you cannot be running an IT organization or even a business organization without actually having a proper business resilience and business continuity planning. And you have to look at scenario planning, scenario modeling. You have to think about loss management, and loss management is an interesting concept. Most of the time we talk about revenue management, and you're thinking about how you're going to get more sales and growth and so forth. But you have to also look at risk events that, and you have to quantify the potential losses or near losses, and then you have to have a strategy of saying, okay, which ones am I going to remediate and eliminate the risk of, so that those losses don't happen. And the part which is interesting is I'm seeing more and more kind of feel for that, how do I connect strategy and risk inherently on the same playbook. So like, I'll
Yes.
give you an example. Most leadership teams, if you were to ask them how much time do they spend on planning and strategy, they'll say, oh, we spend like 100 hours there. When then you ask them, turn around, ask them, how much time do you actually spend talking about the risks? That probably may be a fraction.
Yes.
So the mindset has to move towards saying, risk and strategy are the flip side of the same coin. The chief strategy officer, the chief risk officers, they have to be kind of locked down into the same room, for a while before you can have a strategy that you believe is going to endure the events of risks. So I think some of these fundamental changes in how organizations are led from the top has to happen. And I applaud Infosys, for example. I know you all have proactively integrated risk and strategy as core foundation of how Infosys is run as a company.
Yes.
And to me, that is the wave of the future. You cannot have risk as an afterthought. It just will not work anymore.
No, absolutely. And at this point, I should mention that we are also very proud users of the MetricStream platform. I think your perspective and MetricStream's perspective on looking at risk as an integrated whole, right? Not looking at the various components in isolation, but looking at operational risk, financial risk, technology and cyber risk in an integrated fashion through one platform is a unique insight and has been very helpful for us and for the many clients for whom we've implemented MetricStream together. This is, as you said, because in a crisis, all correlations go to one. And so therefore you don't face just one risk, you face everything almost simultaneously. This most recent pandemic, for instance, you saw technology risk, operational risk, and financial risk hit most firms almost at the same time.
Yeah. No, so I look at it that this is the time, if you look at the next 10 years, I think the framework that's going to come out of it is, if you think about the financial risk, you know, cyber risk, biological risk, and the climate risk. Let's talk about these four. These four, I cannot imagine any company of any size, doesn't matter, that if you don't have a playbook for these four together, and it has to be woven into your annual planning. It has to start from there. It has to go into your strategy, and it has to go into your culture, as we talked about trust, integrity, resilience, because it's not just a systems issue. You've got to also drive the change management so that people understand the role of these things into the very operations of a company. And I don't care how hard you've been hit this time, but let's take an airlines company, which is, presumably we were just talking earlier, right? That they have been hit very hard. But even there, these issues or the strategy that they have to do to deploy systems so that they are better prepared to handle the financial, cyber, biological, as well as the climate risk is foundational. And weaving that into their annual planning, weaving that into their how they think about their strategy development and into the culture, that has to be an agenda that they have to layer in so that there's greater degree of preparedness, so that they can understand scenario planning, they can understand potential loss management, they can think about risk management, they can think about business continuity modeling and planning, and do that in an integrated way. That is where I think the world is going, and that I would call it like strategic risk management. I mean, that is how we've got to do. And I'm really proud that Infosys is actually internally doing that, and so you guys are at my, the way I look at it is, you're not just implementing it at other places or talking about it, but you're actually kind of practicing it yourself. So to me, that is very, very special.
Thank you, Gunjan. And so, if I may draw on the question that you, or rather the points that you made, one of the things that you brought out is technology or IT and cyber risk, right? And clearly at this time, with hundreds of thousands and millions of employees working from home, clearly this has to be a concern for many clients in terms of the additional cyber risks, in terms of the additional fraud risks that they're exposed to as a company. What have clients been telling you about this? What are their concerns, and how does a platform like MetricStream address these concerns?
Yeah. No, so I'll tell you, so one of the biggest things that has happened is, you talked about the notion of trust, right? So what's
Yes.
happening is, we have kind of gone into this work from home universe, and more digital, kind of interactions, more journeys, customer journeys, everything is more digital, which is fundamentally based on a premise that, you have to create a trust who binds people together alongside with a digital fabric. Uh, so in that world, it becomes extremely important that the concepts of GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, has to go beyond just the GRC professionals. What we have to do is to take it to what I call the first line of defense, the business users themselves.
Yes.
So for example, at a large bank, you may have a couple of thousand people who are in the risk business or compliance governance business, but there may be 200,000 employees around the world who are now working from home, digitally connected across the planet. They need to become the source of bubbling of the threats and the risk. So when you think about cyber risk, you want to be able to aggregate the threat intelligence, the vulnerability intelligence coming out from individually those people who are on the front lines of the corporation, and
Right.
then use that to create preemptive strategies if you see loopholes. It's interesting that people are doing a fine job on the cyber side of sourcing RSS feeds. They're getting threat intelligence. They're getting alerts and all of the good stuff. But very little attention goes to the very employee base of as I said, the 200,000 employees. They can give you a lot of intelligence of what's going wrong.
Right.
Your employees themselves. So you want to be able to crowdsource that kind of that threat intelligence into something like the MetricStream solution, and that's where I think the trend is going now, in my mind.
No, that's a very powerful tool, and you're right. It's often underexploited. That you're not using something that is so easily available, and
Yep.
now with technology so easily crowdsourced. That's a very valuable insight, Gunjan. So let me ask you, one final question from my perspective, right? Is the role of AI from a GRC perspective is very clear when it comes to things like scenario planning, because you can have a machine crunch through multiple scenario models and come out with with some level of insight on on probabilities of potential scenarios happening. From your perspective, what is the role of AI for an integrated GRC platform, or even for a firm that is looking at an integrated perspective on GRC? How should firms be looking at using AI to effectively look around corners?
Yeah. No. So in fact, AI is again, an important kind of tool and technology for the world of risk and compliance and governance, and we've been, kind of investing in that and building, capabilities. I looked at AI from two lenses. I call it AI for GRC, which is how do you apply AI for improving your governance, risk, and compliance, and capture the automatic kind of automated intelligence and cross correlations so that you can get heightened awareness of a risk. So, for example, if you were looking at a scenario that you found a risk event like a firewall port is open, for example, as in an isolated case, and alongside you found something else where you saw there was a breach of something else, the cross correlation of these two events may be a much greater heightened risk, even
Right.
though seemingly these two disparate events might themselves may be acceptable or maybe something that you shouldn't worry about it. But the fact that the two of them happen side by side at the same point in time, so AI should be able to pick up these types of what I call patterns and bring that to surface. So that's AI for GRC. But what's fascinating and interesting is the reverse, what I call GRC for AI.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, I was talking to one of the top, chief risk officers in one of the banks in London. In fact, this was early in March when I was actually there. And what was interesting is, many of these large financial institutions have now 10, 15, 20,000 bots running various programs. And these bots, they have to be governed. So GRC
Yes.
is not just about governing humans. It's not just about governing humans. You have to govern and risk management and make sure compliance of the bots themselves. So you have to audit the bots. You have to make sure that the data sources are ethical, that they're compliant to the feds, the FINRA, the SEC, all the regulators that are sitting there. So I think GRC is now moving beyond human error, beyond human intentions, and beyond human culture to kind of saying, okay, if the bots are going to play a pivotal role in the future production, then GRC must govern that too.
Well, that's a very valid point. And in fact, I had personally worked with HSBC and we'd written a paper on AI for large financial institutions. And they actually came out with, which I think was a first, a detailed AI charter to really make it explainable and explain how the underlying philosophy and the underlying principles of integrity that the bank has, how they should translate over into algorithms, for instance.
Yes, and that's exactly what Mohit I'm referring to. But to me, you know, when I see Infosys, I see MetricStream, and is what we are trying to do here. I mean, we've got to tackle both AI for GRC, but we also have to bring GRC to AI, because when you bring GRC to AI, that's when the whole enterprise, the extended enterprise, can be ethical, can be compliant, can operate with trust. And to me, those are kind of imperative words. So our mission at MetricStream is, I call it perform with integrity. That is the core mission statement of MetricStream. That is what we are doing ourselves, practicing, and that's what we want to deliver to the markets, to the customers, through our software technologies and our partnerships like the one which we have with Infosys.
Well, thank you, Gunjan. I think to this point, clearly everybody is looking at long-term resilience now, and the point you're making is it is not possible to have resilience without a high degree of integrity. And this is one of the things that you need an integrated GRC perspective to be able to build, an anti-fragile organization.
Yes, no, that is absolutely the way I think about it, and anti-fragile is the word, because we have to learn to take shocks, even bite size, small size, and you need to train the systems so that it knows how to deal when you actually get bigger shocks, and understand how to be resilient through those things. So I think as an organization, you have to develop strategies, you have to understand the scenarios, and you have to plan for it, and you have to execute to them. So that's the reality. And Mohit, you see a lot of customers and interactions globally, and you touched upon some of the digital transformations, right? Like, and a lot of conversation almost always ends up about saying, how do we perform? How do we kind of improve our performance as a business? And risk is on the other side. I see performance and risk as the flip side of the same coin. Maybe you can share your view on how you see, risk discussions coming, into the center for not just the performance part, but the risk part.
No, I think the risk piece is very important because you're right. In the short term, some organizations, especially in the financial services business, see risk and performance in terms of trade-offs, right? Which is by increasing our tolerance for risk, or by more likely giving a blind eye to risk, we can temporarily improve our performance. But clearly, in the long run, an intelligent appreciation of risk, a systematic measurement of risk, and a very holistic, clear perspective right down from the board of directors about the risk level that they want to operate at is important for long-term survival, not even performance. Right? And we have seen this time and time again that organizations where boards have a very clear perspective on the risk levels that they want to operate at, where boards have complete transparency on the various risk levers that the organization is pulling, and that vision of the risk profile is then shared with operational management and with people at the front line. These firms always outperform other firms in the long run, and I think that appreciation is there. If anything, the current pandemic crisis has brought to light organizations with shoddy risk management and shoddy strategic planning perspectives have underperformed firms that have invested in this and that have a framework to communicate, that have a framework to quantify, and that have a framework to measure the outcomes.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. In fact, this dovetails into one other thing that has been on my mind, and I'd love to ask you is when you look at the post-pandemic economy, like as we evolve, and firstly, how is it going to affect business models, and when you look at it from the vantage point of Infosys, how are you gearing up for these changing business models? And specifically, what I was referring to was, you've seen some many disruptions like that had happened, like Uber came in to disrupt the transportation industry and other force. So people are facing not just the risks that we touched upon, but there are also market disruptions. So how do these dovetail into the future in terms of business model evolution, and how should you advise the boardrooms to think about these disruptions and business model evolutions, and what is Infosys doing to really be at the forefront of those transformations?
Right. So I think, Gunjan, at the start of the pandemic, right, the focus was very much on getting back to a level of operational stability. And so this meant, for instance, for many of our clients, a large scale movement of people working from home. So setting up the essential infrastructure to make sure that people were able to connect and perform the necessary tasks, and obviously to make sure that people were secure and healthy, right? In the second phase, the focus moved from now people can work from home. How do we make sure that they are productive? And now that people are productive and that their work environment is secure, the focus has shifted back to what is it that we need to do in the future and what is our vision for the enterprise. And I think without exception, when people think about which sort of businesses will be successful in the future, we're looking at businesses that are resilient, that are productive, that are scalable, that have managed levels of risk, that have high degrees of trust and collaboration between their client base. They're looking at businesses that have the right digital tools for clients and for employees. And so what this really means in essence is that there is a very clear digital agenda. And the digital agenda has many shapes, right? I think cloud is an important component of the digital agenda. I think improved user experience is a critical portion of the digital agenda. Uh, Looking at automation, both software-driven automation and physical automation is a clear part of the agenda. But there is also a cost agenda, right? Yeah, because businesses will be stretched from a revenue perspective, for a while, especially the non-technology businesses. How do we make sure that our business is is optimally suited from a cost perspective of the future? And so we're working with our clients on both their digital agendas and their cost agendas as they imagine the future.
Now that's a very good point. And so when you see specifically the MetricStream Infosys partnership, what do you see road ahead? Because as we said, we really value the partnership, and we think there's a tremendous role that we have to play to get the world going back again, right, in the post COVID-19 world. How do you see it from your vantage point, the relationship that the two firms have to help solve the problems that we see?
Sure. So I think, Gunjan, we have a unique relationship, right? And I just want to make four broad points over here about the relationship. The first is that we are not just a partner to MetricStream. We are not just an implementation expert. We are a user of MetricStream, right? And that is very important. We have used MetricStream to co-create a very comprehensive enterprise risk framework for ourselves. That we use as executives in the company and that our board uses, right? Which gives us a unique perspective on the platform. I think the second piece is that we've also jointly created innovative solutions, in the GRC space. We have built on top of MetricStream to create a digital suite, which has additional AI and automation tools that can be used by our clients. So that is the second piece, right? So we are a user, but then we've also built, additional tooling and capabilities that coexist with the platform. The fact that MetricStream is a cloud native business is very important for us, right? And this is a factor that all of our clients are looking at, and this is something that we should together jointly look to amplify, that you are a cloud native platform.
Yeah.
And I think finally, from my perspective, both companies have a huge focus on training and on learning. And this is something because, as you said, awareness about GRC needs to spread out to the edges of the organization and not just remain at the board level. And so this is a common imperative that I know both of our teams are working on. So these are the four things, right? The our experience as a user, our experience as a developer on the platform, our experience with using this as one of the leading cloud native platform in this space, and finally, the joint imperative to train and to learn.
Yeah, no, that I would completely echo the same sentiment. I think those four are really the core elements. So I'm really looking forward to that. We together as two firms kind of help the world perform with integrity and resilience, and more so now than ever, given what we have. So this is, to me, has been the vision of MetricStream, and I'm really looking forward to our continued partnership. So Mohit, so thank you for kind of organizing this chat, and I think I really thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure we will meet in person sometime soon, either in Palo Alto or in London. So
Well, thank you.
yeah,
I really enjoyed our discussion. It was very insightful, and I've come out with a lot of very compelling ideas that that you brought to the table, and look forward to working together to amplify, to grow, and to deepen this partnership.
wonderful. Thank you.